Major funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide.
Tonight on Frontline, a compelling analysis of a criminal mind.
This one I killed. This was the first one I killed.
The case, Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler. Was he insane, a multiple personality, or was he faking?
He was a full-fledged multiple personality.
This man is faking a multiple personality.
He may simply be evil.
Tonight, the final verdict on the Hillside Strangler, unraveling the mind of a murderer.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline.
Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight, the conclusion of a special two-part documentary which reveals the terrifying psychology of a killer. It's the case of Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler. He was involved in the murder of at least 10 women in Los Angeles, terrorizing the city for 5 months in 1977 and 78. After his arrest, Bianchi was interviewed by a series of psychological experts to determine if he was insane. His behavior suggested that Bianchi was a multiple personality, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, who looked like an all-American husband and father, but who was at the same time a cold-blooded murderer. 4 experts believed he was insane, but the police didn't. They thought Bianchi was faking. Using over 60 hours of videotaped jailhouse interviews with Bianchi, Frontline has recreated this case step by step. It's an unprecedented examination of the mind of a murderer. The program is produced and directed by Michael Barnes, and one word of warning, there are brief but graphic photographs of the victims' bodies and some strong language.
Bianchi is probably as cold a killer as I've met.
The kid I knew couldn't have ever hurt anybody or killed anybody.
Obviously, he's a very complex person who's unable to accept responsibilities for his actions and gets a thrill out of killing young girls.
He was very sincere, kind, and he had a certain magnetism about him that drew all women to him.
Well, he's a man with a tremendous ego that is intelligent and has the ability to do whatever he wants to do. But he is also a multiple murderer.
After interviewing him intensely for 2 days, I was quite convinced that he was a full-fledged multiple personality.
I don't really understand the multiple personality bit, but the person I did at once know couldn't have done it.
There was no doubt that Kenneth Bianchi was a killer. But was he insane? Was he a genuine multiple personality? Or could he have fooled the experts in a bold attempt to avoid the death penalty? More than 60 hours of interviews between Bianchi and the experts trying to answer those questions were videotaped after his arrest in 1979. They show Bianchi's 2 different personalities. First, Ken, the all-American boy.
Oh, you want to get back to why I came to California? Yeah. Well, I came there hoping to find a better job. I've always wanted to go to California, the sun, the girls, the beaches.
The other side of Ken's personality, of which he claimed to know nothing, was a violent character called Steve, who later confessed to the killings.
I told you, killing abroad doesn't make any difference to me. Killing any fucking buddy doesn't make any difference.
Maybe you didn't kill any of those. I don't know.
Oh, hey, no, wrong, man. Hey, I killed a couple of these.
Was Steve a separate personality who at times took over Ken's body? Was Steve responsible for the horrible murders which seemed impossible for Ken to have committed? These questions began a probe into Kenneth Bianchi's mind that would eventually put psychiatry itself on trial.
The killings progressed from a straight strangulation killing to actually trying to gas one of the girls using gas from the house in a plastic bag. One of the girls was hooked up to 110 volts, taping the circuit to her hands and plugging her into 110, presumably to watch her jump. One of the girls, in fact, the one that was suffocated with the gas, was injected with some sort of cleaning solution. We don't know exactly what the solution was, but presumably she went into some sort of convulsions because of that. We got a feeling there was something in progression that became more grotesque, more adventuresome, and more hideous, really.
By late 1977, 10 young women had been raped and killed in or near Los Angeles, and their bodies dumped on hillsides near the freeways. The city was terrorized for 5 months. Then a year later, there was a double murder in Bellingham, 1,000 miles to the north in Washington state. Ken Bianchi was arrested. He was an unlikely suspect, a proud father and member of the Sheriff's Reserve. He denied the charges, saying he had no memory of the killings, and even as evidence against him mounted, he refused an insanity defense. Only when Bianchi was hypnotized did the completely different personality called Steve emerge and confess not only to the Bellingham murders, but to those in Los Angeles. Bianchi said he had been involved in the Los Angeles killings with his cousin Angelo Bono. Bono denied that charge, so the police faced a problem. Their case against Bono depended on the testimony of Kenneth Bianchi, and if Bianchi was found to be insane, he probably would not be allowed to testify against his cousin.
After I examined Bianchi on March the 21st and 22nd, 1979, both in hypnosis and out of hypnosis, I concluded that he was definitely a true multiple personality case. In fact, one of the most clear-cut ones I had seen in working with that type of problem over many years.
The Bellingham judge appointed his own expert, independent of the defense or prosecution, California psychiatrist Dr. Ralph Allison.
In my considered professional opinion, Ken Bianchi was legally insane at the time of the killings in Bellingham because of having multiple personalities.
The prosecution pinned its hopes on Dr. Martin Orne, professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. Before interviewing Bianchi further, he decided to look at the increasingly bizarre findings of police investigations into Bianchi's past.
Especially in a first-degree murder case, I feel I cannot rely on what the defendant says without corroboration. So I insisted on getting all of the police records and comparing this with what he said to all of us. And it led to some very interesting data. For example, there was an interaction between Angelo and Mr. Bianchi, which must have been truly memorable with an individual that occurred several years before he was arrested.
That individual was Tiny Boyles, a 440-pound, 6-foot bodyguard. Some years before, Tiny had run across Bianchi and Angelo Bono. His meeting was to become significant in Dr. Orne's investigation because Tiny had discovered that Bianchi was not quite the all-American boy he seemed.
But you do know that they were running a ring of prostitution and using young girls, exploiting them. Mainly for, the best I could find out in my investigation, they were using them for blackmail.
Tiny learned that while Bianchi and Bono were running their ring of underage prostitutes, they had a conflict with one of their clients, a Los Angeles lawyer, which supposedly had escalated to a point where the cousins had threatened to kill the lawyer. The lawyer responded by sending Tiny Boyles and 4 of his friends over to reason with Bianchi and Bono.
Bono was working on a car, detailing it. And I kept talking to him, and he kept ignoring me. So I reached in the window and jerked him out through the window so fast, so hard, he left his shoes in there. And while I had him up in the air, I asked him if he'd all mind paying attention to me. So while I was dangling him in the air, he paid full attention, so I lowered him back down on the ground. And I gave him one of the lawyer's cards, and I told him, I said, don't be offering to kill him no more, because the last thing in the world you want's an instant replay of me.
So how did Bono react to that?
He told me there'd be no more troubles.
And what about Bianchi?
Bianchi is a little sniveling poo butt. But he was what you call the doc, what we call the perverted doc. His job was, if girls were scared of snakes, he put snakes on them. He done that to make sure they brought the money home. He worked on their morbid fears. And he run behind his security door, which he'd already knew who we were, what we were. And he's behind his door, holding the security door, sniveling, "Please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me." Well, we knew they were into something heavy, but we didn't know what. But if I'd have known it was killing those little young girls, one of those girls was, 13, 14 years old? If I'd have known it, I got 4 daughters of my own, I'd have snapped their neck like a twig and not had no remorse for it.
Dr. Orn decided that this encounter was important enough to ask Bianchi if he could remember Tiny and his friends.
Yeah, but I understand that whoever it was got some 5 tough, big guys to talk with you, reason with you, however it's put.
No, you got the wrong person. Angelo.
Oh.
They visited Angelo's shop.
I see, but
They were bikers. They're called motorcyclists from a local bike club. They visited Angelo's shop.
Yeah, but they came, look, I wasn't there, but I understand they came to see you also, and you kind of got away just as they were coming. I'm trying to think back, because that must have been a very impressive group.
Mr. Bianchi's not remembering an event which is very memorable is very telling. Either he is giving me a barefaced lie, and he's been accused of being a pathological liar by many people, or the same thing could be explained by his being multiple personality and really not knowing. And the problem is to distinguish between these two possibilities. The behavior could be explained in both ways.
While Dr. Orn was beginning to probe Kenneth Bianchi's mind, the police continued to look into his past. In Los Angeles, police found a psychologist, Charles Weingarten. He told of meeting a Kenneth Bianchi who claimed to be a psychologist.
He wanted to rent office space from me. He said that he was desperate for some space, and I told him we weren't renting, but I would let him use the office for a couple of weeks till he could find permanent space. He was very appropriate when he came in. He smiled easily. He talked well about transactional analysis, which is the kind of therapy that he said he used. We talked a little about that.
How did he present himself?
He was very well dressed. He appeared to be intelligent. He sounded that way. He commented on my diplomas and licenses, my business card, the type of practice that I had. He asked appropriate questions.
So what do you feel in retrospect?
It was a good con.
2 things that Bianchi was most interested in was 1, the business card, and 2 were some plaques he had on the wall, permaplaques of his degrees. Well, shortly after Bianchi surfaces up in Bellingham, we discovered that Bianchi had such plaques. Here's photographs of them. Trustees, Columbia University, confer on Kenneth Alicio Bianchi a Master of Science degree in psychology. Another one, Certificate of Accomplished Kenneth A. Bianchi, intern in residence, Strong Memorial Hospital in New York. And an interesting one here is an institution or an association that doesn't even exist, the National Psychiatric Association of America, Kenneth A. Bianchi, Doctor of Psychiatry.
Bianchi told his girlfriend, Kelly Boyd, that he had received a doctor's degree.
I was kind of dumbfounded. I didn't understand how he could have done that. And I also wondered why he'd never said anything to me about it at all before. And I asked him about it, and he said he hadn't told anybody about this doctorate paper he'd written up because he was afraid it wouldn't be accepted, and then he'd be embarrassed about it, and then he kept it all from his mom. She didn't know anything about it because of the same reasons. And so that sounded like it could be possible, it sounded like a real reason for him. because he wanted everybody to approve of him so much.
We came across a handwritten flyer that he had been putting under the windshield wipers of cars parked in the neighborhood. He had the date October, November of '76 on the bottom of this thing with a copy of his graduation picture, presumably. It read, "Dear neighbor, hi, first let me introduce myself. My name is Ken Bianchi. I'm a '74 graduate of Columbia University, served an internship at a major New York hospital, and over 2 years of private practice." He then goes on to state that for the nominal fee of $10, you can mail him 5 questions or problems, and send your question or problem along with your age, sex, first initial and last name, and a check or money order to cover the fee, and that he will return an answer as soon as possible. We had a budding neighborhood Dear Abby there in Glendale.
There's several parts to the diploma thing. I was aware that they did exist. However, to me, they were just a novelty item. But there was more to it than that.
Well, what about the counseling service in the office that you know, I've seen the log in, log out, you know, Ken Bianchi, the building now, well, what do you remember of that?
Now I can remember going there with Kelly.
If I had asked you in March, could you?
I would have looked like a stupid, bold-faced liar.
It was clear that both the diplomas and the counseling service were phony. But was this the work of Steve? Had he taken over? Was Ken only now beginning to remember Steve's actions? It could be read that way. Dr. Orne went to the Bellingham jail in May 1979 in an attempt to find out if Kenneth Bianchi was a genuine multiple personality or not.
I had an unusual opportunity because Mr. Bianchi had worked with 2 great authorities on multiple personality, and Dr. Allison had tried to bring out another personality and failed. This gave me the possibility of doing exactly what Dr. Allison had done in hypnosis, where I knew he wasn't going to come out with another personality. There's no reason why he should. But to add one thing, that is, in the wake state, to give him a hint that his interests would be best served if he brought out an extra personality, because every multiple typically has 3 or more. And if he was malingering or faking, then he'd grab onto that hint, and when later hypnotized, he was going to bring out 1, 2, or 3 extra personalities.
In this videotape, Bianchi is not yet hypnotized. Martin Orne will quietly drop the hint that genuine multiples usually have more than 2 personalities.
And I was told that there was a possibility that I had what's called a multiple personality, which means that there are 2 separate distinct personalities within the same body, I guess.
It's very rare for there to be 2, actually. That's one of the things I'm curious about.
Yeah, they mentioned only the 2. I don't know. I really don't know that much about the field. It's just as new to me as it is to, a lot of other people.
All right. As I say, 1, you'll grow deeper, you'll sink deeper, and you will become aware of it happening. It will not be frightening to you because you know I'm here and you're safe.
Later that day, Dr. Orne put Bianchi to the test. Under hypnosis, Orne asked whether there were any other personalities whom he and the other psychiatrists had not met. Would Bianchi take the hint?
And as I talk to you now, that part of you which has not talked to anyone, that is not Ken, and that is not Steve, may come forth. What is your name?
Billy.
All right, Billy. Tell me, what you know about Ken?
Ken. I don't know, Ken.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what is your last name?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And how about Steve?
I I know Steve.
Do you like Steve?
He's a bad egg.
Doctors Watkins and Allison applauded Dr. Warren's success in bringing out this new personality. Had he succeeded where they had failed?
Well, actually, I mimicked the approaches which they took. And if you don't notice the little hint which I gave that every multiple personality typically has 3, and you overlook that, then it certainly appears as if I did a better job than they did because the part came out for me and it hadn't for them. But that's because of what I said in the wake state, not what I said in hypnosis.
So you mean Mr. Bianchi just picked it up because it would make him more credible?
That's the way I interpret it, exactly.
Does this prove that he was faking?
It certainly makes me more suspicious. However, you can't prove anything with a single item of data. This is one item of data, a compelling one, but there are many others which we looked for and where I tried to find a way in which Mr. Bianchi could demonstrate that he was a real multiple, if in fact he was.
If Bianchi was faking multiple personality, was he also faking hypnosis? This was an important issue for the police. Under California law, a witness who has been hypnotized cannot testify in court because hypnosis changes memory. If Kenneth Bianchi really was hypnotized, he could not testify against Angelo Bono.
We've done a lot of work about the faking of hypnosis and found, to our surprise, that even the world's outstanding hypnotists could not identify people who were untrained faking hypnosis. After a while, we began to develop criteria, and we've done a lot of work in finding things which separate people who are faking from those who are not. I asked him to hallucinate Mr. Brett, his attorney. A good subject would be able to do that with no difficulty, and indeed he apparently hallucinates Mr. Brett.
As you open your eyes, there's a chair in front of you, and a chair with armrests where Mr. Brett will be sitting. And you will be able to see him clearly in front of you. Open your eyes and look at Mr. Brett. He wants to talk to you.
Hey, Dean. How you doing? What's new?
I'll leave you to talk to him for a few moments. I'll be back.
Okay. Did your wife have the baby yet? No, not yet? Okay. So what's new? What are we going to talk about, the 3 of us?
Well, I want you to describe Dean to me in some detail. What is he shaven?
Oh, no. His beard? God, you can see him. You must be able to see him.
Go on.
His hair isn't combed as usual.
First of all, his spontaneously getting up and shaking the hand is something which you never see with deeply hypnotized subjects. I've never seen any subject do this spontaneously because when you shake somebody's hand, that's a tactile hallucination which you have to have, and it makes it much more difficult, and people don't volunteer this unless they're asked to do it. Even more striking, though, is what he does when I ask him to describe Dean Brett. He says, "You see him. You must see him. He's there. You must see him." Now, that's an overplaying. Shakespeare would say, "Methinks he doth protest too much."
You're not talking to some fucking dummy. You understand?
Martin Orne also studied what happened when Ken's second personality, Steve, appeared. He examined the videotapes of the other psychiatrists and was intrigued by Steve's behavior.
You think you're so fucking smart.
At one point, Steve comes out, and Steve tears the tips off the cigarettes, and he smokes the unfiltered part. When Ken comes back, he begins to talk, and he notices this, and he says, "Who would put filter tips here? Why are those filter tips here? How did those filter tips get there?" Now, a subject might ask once, how come those filter tips are there? But, he goes on, and he kind of, again, protests too much. He's rubbing in the fact that he doesn't know how those filter tips get there to demonstrate to either Dr. Allison or Dr. Watkins, he does the trick with both of them, in order to prove to them that he really has had an issue.
And there's the other cigarette you just finished. I don't smoke.
Why does the filter break off?
The hand broke it off. Don't you break off filters?
No, I can't smoke a non-filter cigarette.
Well, what happened here? The smoke without the filter on it? Is that right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. I guess somebody around here smokes without a filter. You ever found that before?
Yeah.
Where and when?
At home. Different times, around apartments I've had.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe it broke when I put it into the ashtray and after
It doesn't look like that.
No, it doesn't.
He does the same thing with Dr. Watkins. He does with the rosary, for example. The same kind of thing. How did the rosary get here?
What's my rosary doing here? Huh? What's my rosary doing on the table?
Didn't you put it on the table?
No. No, I hid it in my pocket.
I thought you put it on the table, no?
No.
As if he thought that the experts were all kind of thick, and he's got to really rub it in so they should understand it. By the same token, he picks up on cues. When he is asked whether he had ever seen those filter tips around, he thinks for a while, and then out he comes. Yes, of course, I saw them, and they puzzled me. I didn't know what they were, and he describes this. The catch is, his wife never reports anything of that kind. No one has ever seen anything of that sort. There's absolutely no corroboration. Furthermore, he's seen Three Faces of Eve, the film, which is like an education in how to fake a multiple personality. And a lot of other data, which is in the police records and in the interviews, convince me that this man is faking a multiple personality and he's faking hypnosis.
I couldn't see that this was fake. I couldn't see that it was a play act. And I really couldn't comprehend his reasoning. I was totally baffled. I said, well, if I didn't know I wasn't hypnotizing him, who does? Who is the second guess? He wasn't in the room. How is he going to know whether I did or didn't? I was rather thoroughly confused and said, what are the facts behind this opinion?
I was flabbergasted. I felt that totally surprised that after his particular interviews, he came out with an exactly opposite conclusion from what I saw in observing his tapes.
What in particular in his tapes confirmed your diagnosis?
The behavior of Bianchi in going into hypnosis and coming out, the inductions that were used by Orne were very typical of hypnotized subjects. The personalities that came out showed the same clear-cut differences that they did when they came out for me.
How did Bianchi's lawyer respond to Dr. Orne's claim?
Well, Dr. Orne was hired by the prosecuting attorney, so we expected that he would come back with the conclusion that Ken was not insane. We were dismayed, though, that he didn't set up a diagnosis of his own that took into account the childhood psychiatric records. And we were frankly surprised when he said that Ken was faking hypnosis. Ken had been examined by 6 court-appointed psychiatrists, 2 other psychiatrists, and 3 psychologists, and only the 2 appointed by the prosecuting attorney said he was faking.
As the experts continued to disagree, the police evidence mounted against Angelo Bono, Kenneth Bianchi's alleged accomplice. Although Bono still denied any part in the murders, the police searched his house hoping to find some evidence that would link him with the crimes. They found a loaded revolver in his office and a cupboard full of firearms, including shotguns and a machine gun. And more importantly, they found a wallet bearing the imprint of a badge, which Bianchi had claimed was used to pick up the victims.
What we also have to consider is what was not found at the time of the searches. And I'm referring to things that we know that Angelo Bono possessed that were not there when the police searched his house. Specifically, there was no police badge found, which we knew he owned. There were no handcuffs found, which we knew he owned. And there was no 5-foot gas pipe found, which was attached to Angelo Bono's stove and which was used to kill one of the girls by means of asphyxiation. And we knew that he had bought a 5-foot gas pipe and it was not present at the time of the search. Finally, there were no fingerprints found anywhere in the house, which is kind of unusual in that you would expect in the house where people live that there would be some fingerprints found on the walls someplace, but there were none found anywhere.
But this was all circumstantial evidence. Angelo Bono seemed certain to go free if Bianchi were unable to testify against him. At this point, the police investigation focused on a letter written before Bianchi's arrest and found in his clothing after he was jailed. The letter was signed, Thomas Stephen Walker. And to the defense, it was more evidence that Steve was really taking over Ken Bianchi's life.
We found that as something that might verify the existence of Steve Walker, Watkins' multiple personality, Steve Walker.
Were you excited when that time?
Yes, that was a favorable thing.
The police saw this very differently. They still did not believe Steve had been taking over Ken's body, and they were curious to know where the name Steve Walker had come from. They visited Valley College in Los Angeles, where they came up with an explanation that dramatically changed the picture.
These university records in the name of Kenneth A. Bianchi, retrieved at the time of his arrest in the state of Washington, turned out to be our best piece of evidence against the multiple personality. These indicate that Bianchi attended 3 universities here in the state of California and ultimately graduating with a master's degree in psychology. At the time of their discovery, we didn't feel that they were authentic due to the education starting in '73, which was a period of time when we knew for a fact he was still living in Rochester, New York. In coming here to Valley College, we gave them to the supervising clerk, and she indicated to us upon first glance that they were a forgery due to the date of birth of the actual student being coded into the transcript and not corresponding to the date of birth that Bianchi put in being his own.
If the university records were forged, who did the originals belong to? They were traced to a young psychology graduate, Thomas Walker.
Immediately showed me a university record, which turned out to be one of mine. They asked me if I recognized the name that was at the top of the paper. I looked up and expecting to see my own name, instead seeing the name of Kenneth A. Bianchi in its place.
How did he get it?
I had answered an ad in the Los Angeles Times Classified for a job, requesting copies of transcripts, my university records, resume, which I sent. Upon receipt, he took all the records and deleted my name from each of them and substituted his own in its place.
But why did this become so important in the case?
My middle name is Stephen, and it leads to Stephen Walker, which is the name of the alter ego Kenneth Bianchi used.
Ken Bianchi had adopted Stephen Walker as the name of his supposed second personality. He had taken the university records and replaced Stephen Walker's name with his own. He continued to forge Walker's signature to get further records as he had done in the original letter.
The impact was that it broke the multiple personality defense. We were able to prove and document the fact that Thomas Stephen Walker really did exist, and it was not an alter ego of Kenneth Bianchi. And because of that, Bianchi subsequently changed his plea.
This morning, a sensational break in the Hillside Strangler case. Bianchi entered the Whatcom County Superior Court amid tight security. Sitting in the packed courtroom was Bianchi's common-law wife, Kelly Boyd.
Faced with the compelling police evidence on Stephen Walker, and with Dr. Orn's investigation that cast grave doubts on the psychiatric evidence, Kenneth Bianchi withdrew his plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. In a plea bargain, the state of Washington dropped its demand for the death penalty in exchange for an agreement from Bianchi to plead guilty to the Bellingham murders and to testify against Angelo Bono in Los Angeles.
Bianchi, who had wept openly during much of the hour-long proceeding, was asked if he had anything to say before the sentence was passed.
Your Honor, I can't find the words to express the sorrow I feel for what I've done. In no way can I take away the pain that I've given to others. And in no way can I expect forgiveness from anybody. To even begin to try and live with myself, I have to take responsibility for what I've done. And I have to do everything I can to get Angelo Bono and to devote my entire life to do everything I possibly can to give my life so that nobody else will hopefully won't follow my footsteps.
Is that all? I think that's all he wants to say there.
But Ken Bianchi's story was not over. He still faced charges for the 10 killings in Los Angeles. There remained doubts on his reliability as a witness. No court had yet ruled on his state of mind. Was he really insane? Certainly, his behavior was disturbing.
Within 3 minutes of leaving the courtroom, myself, Detective Nolde, and another officer had contact with Mr. Bianchi. And when we contacted him, he was sitting at a desk at a table, feet up on the table, crossed, laid back in the chair, smoking a cigarette and laughing. And in the courtroom 3 minutes prior, tears had been rolling like crazy, and he was a real sad case in the courtroom.
After the hearing, Bianchi was flown to Los Angeles to be arraigned with the Hillside Strangler murders. Although formally charged with the same 10 deaths as Angelo Bono, he will plead guilty to 5 of them and receive life sentences in both states. The deal is that Kenneth Bianchi will be spared the death penalty on condition that he testifies against his cousin, Angelo Bono.
Bono was taken into custody earlier yesterday after being arrested at his home in Glendale. Prosecutors now have some evidence linking 45-year-old Angelo Bono to the Hillside Strangler murders, but they do not think this evidence is enough without the testimony of his cousin. The fate of Angelo Bono now rests on the credibility of Kenneth Bianchi as a witness.
Kenneth Bianchi's state of mind became the central legal question in Los Angeles. No court had yet ruled on his sanity, or whether he had truly been hypnotized. If he was insane, or if he had been hypnotized, he would be unable to testify against Angelo Bono. An alleged mass murderer might go free. As court hearings on Bianchi's sanity approached, Dr. Orn consulted Margaret Singer, a professor of psychology at the University of California in Berkeley.
From childhood on, Mr. Bianchi's history is that of a typical psychopath. Even his own mother said that he lied. And he has a history of lifelong, almost pointless lying, which is the mark of a psychopathic kind of habitual lying, that it's easier to lie than to tell the truth. And the lying is done usually just to try to persuade a person or to make the psychopath feel better at the moment.
While Bianchi was in jail, he sent almost 50 love letters to a young woman he had known in Bellingham. Dr. Singer saw these letters as evidence of the lies and manipulative charm of a psychopath. They were addressed to hairdresser Angie Kinneberg.
He seemed interested in what I was doing with myself, and he was honest with me, concerned, and very convincing, even in his writing. I believed anything he said to me, and he told me he was innocent. He once said that he wished it would be like a Perry Mason movie, where in the end someone would stand up and say they were with him in the night of question. And in the meantime, after he got arrested, I received some letters. Like on February 2nd, it says, "If I can't account for the time between 8:10 and 9:50, I'm probably going to die in the gas chamber because of what someone else did. If only I had come over to see you, I would have had an alibi that would save my life." On February 8th, it says, "I wish there was someone who was with me that January 11th night from around 8 till almost 10 p.m., someone who can give a statement to that effect and swear to it." On February 25th, "Dean came in this morning and said that if you don't come forward before February 28th, you can never come forward in my behalf. I told him you feared for your life. He said, without your testimony, I was sunk.
What did you make of this?
I read between the lines, and I've decided that he wanted me to write an alibi for him, which I did. And I sent it to him in jail.
What was going through your mind?
Well, at first I thought, how could this person do anything wrong? I figured if he could get out of jail, he could prove himself. But I wrote to him saying where we were, what I was wearing, and all these things. And after I sent it to him, a couple days later, I decided, I can't do this. This is all wrong. So I decided to tell him, just get rid of him. Then a couple days later, his lawyer called me and asked to have a talk with me. So I went and spoke to him. And he said that if I went along with it, I would be an accessory to the fact. I already told him, though, that I'd told Ken to get rid of the letter.
How did Ken take it?
The last time I got to see him was to tell him that I decided not to do it. And he said, whatever you feel is best.
Angie Kinneberg still writes me now and again, and she has this fantasy love affair going with me, even though there's never been anything between us. Not even a real good friendship. This has just started since I've been in jail.
How do you account for that? Let's back up.
Did I ever lead on or give her any reason
Yeah.
to? No.
Did you ever sleep with her?
No, never.
No?
Never slept with her, never dated with her, never kissed her, never held her
But
hand.
actually, you sent her flowers, didn't you?
Her and Kathy. And the reason for
that impresses some girls a lot. I mean, maybe it was that kind of thing, huh?
it was they had come into my office crying.
Yeah, I remember.
Because of
I'm
Christmas.
just trying to think. I'm saying maybe it was that.
She thought that was the most thoughtful thing that anybody's ever done to her before, and it has been something that has grown and grown. I mean, I'll let you read some. I don't have all the letters. I've destroyed a lot of them because they're just. But I mean, it's just grown into such a fantastic one-sided love affair. She's just madly in love. She signs her letters now. I love you very much.
Angie was only one. There were 12 other alibis. Psychopaths never quit. For example, he had asked his mother to type an alibi letter for him with rubber gloves on so there'd be no fingerprints on it, and would she fly to Seattle, Washington still with rubber gloves and mail it so that would establish an alibi. He also tried to blame the murders up in Washington on Greg, a dead motorcyclist whom he knew was dead. He also tried to get a copycat killer, namely a woman that he induced to go and attempt to duplicate the murders to be an alibi for him. He convinced another woman to confess for him. The psychopaths just don't stop, they don't give up, they continue the same style.
Is he sane?
Yes, he's sane. He knew the difference between right and wrong. He was able to form the intent for the murders, and they were highly planned and organized murders both before and afterwards. He is sane in the eyes of the law. The general public may think that this is crazy behavior. It is outrageous behavior, but in the eyes of the law, it is sane.
Margaret Singer got unexpected support for her opinion. The night before he was to be cross-examined in Bianchi's sanity hearing, Dr. Ralph Allison, who had left private practice to become a prison psychiatrist, said he had changed his mind about Bianchi. Experience in prison opened his eyes.
Well, I quickly learned, working here with inmates, that I had no reason to believe anything they said. That was a shock to me because I had been used to believing what my patients told me and working from that. But here I would meet a man as he's trying to go on parole. And I find out that he's told one story when he got arrested to the police, another story to his own attorney, a third story when he got into court, a fourth story to his parole officer, and a fifth story to me when I got him here. And now he wants to go on parole and he's got a sixth story. And there's no way, that you can tell what's the truth when you have that kind of changing history.
When I examined Bianchi myself, I constantly had in mind, are we dealing with a real multiple personality? This is the question that I always have in mind when I am called in on such cases. And I also studied Dr. Orn's tapes over a number of times and Dr. Allison's over a number of times. And the more I studied them, the more it became evident to me that we really were dealing with a true multiple personality.
So despite Dr. Allison's change of mind, 4 experts still believed Bianchi was insane. Was he really smart enough to fake both hypnosis and a complex disorder like multiple personality? The police believed he was.
After learning about Kenneth Bianchi's psychological defense, we happened to be in his home serving a search warrant in Bellingham when we discovered these books in the home. Some of the books were found in the upstairs in the bookshelf, and some of them were found in the basement in boxes. Among these books were a dictionary of behavioral science, psychoanalysis of behavior therapy, psychology, behavioral therapy, modern clinical psychology, diagnostic psychological testing, hypnotic techniques, elements of psychology, supervision of police personnel, infant psychiatry, criminal procedure law, and juvenile delinquency.
So what did all this suggest to you?
Well, as a layman, finding these books in Kenneth Bianchi's home, I had to believe that he had either some background or knowledge in psychology or the behavioral sciences.
He's a wannabe doctor or a wannabe psychologist, and he had that background. And I think when he got stuck in a corner up there and looked like he was going to fry, he went back to the thing he probably knew the best, and that was a psychiatric thing.
The hearings to decide if Bianchi faked were held before Judge Ronald George of the Los Angeles Superior Court. The judge personally viewed over 60 hours of videotape, heard the experts cross-examined, and delivered his judgment on November 3rd, 1981.
My judgment was that Bianchi faked both the hypnosis and the multiple personality, and I came to that conclusion based on the circumstantial evidence acquired by the police, the contradictory testimony of Bianchi with regard to his mental status, and the opinions voiced by the psychiatrist who examined him. Now, the circumstantial evidence, of course, involved the feigned Steve Walker personality, the books on hypnosis, psychiatry, and psychology, the psychology counseling service, and the lack of any history, of course, of amnesia, multiple personality, and so forth, and the viewing of Sybil and Three Faces of Eve and the reading of a book in that regard. Now, the physicians had very different techniques. I was impressed by Dr. Orn's credentials and his methodology. He relied on logic and on the circumstantial evidence, on the history of Bianchi, and did not ask us to accept his opinion merely on the basis of authority. On the contrary, Dr. Watkins, I thought, was incredibly naive in making certain assumptions that Mr. Bianchi would not malinger and that he was, in fact, telling the truth on all occasions.
The judge in his summing up said you were, and I quote, incredibly naive. Why do you think he said that?
Well, it's very difficult for judges and lawyers to believe in the reality of multiple personality, especially when many psychologists and psychiatrists themselves don't believe in that reality. And judges do tend to be incredibly naive psychologically, even as I am very naive in legal matters.
But he seems to be saying you've ignored a lot of factual evidence.
I had all the evidence that was given by all the examinations, and I didn't see the evidence as being factual at all. They simply reported that this body known as Bianchi did certain things at certain times, but in no way could they show whether it was Steve or Ken that was the executive personality at that time.
In November 1981, Angelo Bono was finally put on trial for murder. The star witness was his cousin Kenneth Bianchi. During 80 days on the stand, Bianchi constantly changed his story. One day he said he was responsible for a murder, the next day he said Angelo did it. But the prosecution did not have to rely on Bianchi alone. The lengthy evaluation of fibers found in Bono's shop was now complete. Those fibers matched fibers found on the eyelids of one of the victims. Fibers found on this chair matched those found on the wrists of another victim, Lauren Wagner, who had been tortured with electric shocks before she was strangled.
Department 123 of the Superior Court of the State of California for the County of Los Angeles is now in session.
On January 9th, 1984, the longest criminal trial in American history came to an end. Kenneth Bianchi had already escaped the death penalty by agreeing to testify against his cousin. Apparently, the jury felt it unfair to request the death penalty for Angelo Bono. He was given life without possibility of parole.
If ever there was a case where the death penalty is appropriate, this is that case. Angelo Bono and Kenneth Bianchi terrorized the city for several months, haunting the community like the ultimate in evil spirits as they abducted children and young women, torturing, raping, and sodomizing them, and finally depriving their families and friends of them forever as Angelo Bono and Kenneth Bianchi slowly squeezed out of their victims their last breath of air and their promise of a future life. And all for what? The momentary sadistic thrill of enjoying a brief, perverted sexual satisfaction and the venting of their hatred of women. Angelo Bono and Kenneth Bianchi subjected various of their murder victims to the administration of lethal gas, electrocution, strangulation by rope, and lethal hypodermic injection.
And the judge had this to say about Kenneth Bianchi.
Mr. Bianchi had faked memory loss, he had faked hypnosis, and he had faked multiple personalities. This action by Mr. Bianchi caused confusion and delay in the proceedings. In this, Mr. Bianchi was unwittingly aided and abetted by most of the psychiatrists who naively swallowed Mr. Bianchi's story hook, line, and sinker, almost confounding the criminal justice system. I'm sure, Mr. Bono and Mr. Bianchi, that you will both probably only get your thrills reliving over and over again the tortures and murders of your victims, being incapable, as I believe you to be, of ever feeling any remorse. I wish, finally, to place on the record my firm belief that neither Mr. Bono nor Mr. Bianchi should ever see the outside of prison walls once delivered there.
Ken Bianchi was sentenced to life imprisonment. Although technically eligible for parole, no one believes it will ever be granted. And the final diagnosis on Kenneth Bianchi?
Mr. Bianchi is a sexual psychopath. What is wrong is that the sexual impulse becomes twisted and fused with violence, so that the individual derives sexual satisfaction from the violence around a murder.
And what creates such a psychopath?
Science really doesn't know. There may be genetic and environmental influences intermingling. We don't really know for sure. He may simply be evil.
Many believe this case puts psychiatry itself on trial. Are courts and lawyers placing too much emphasis on what is clearly an imperfect science? After John Hinckley Jr. was found not guilty of trying to assassinate President Reagan because a jury was convinced he was insane, both the American Psychiatric Association and the American Medical Association called for a more carefully defined use of psychiatric evidence in the courtroom. But even in cases where insanity is not the defense, juries frequently hear testimony from psychiatrists. Charles Manson, Patty Hearst, Gene Harris, none was declared insane, but each of their trials featured the opinions of experts, trying to prove what probably can't be proved, the state of mind and motivations of the accused. You have had a unique opportunity tonight to look over the shoulders of the experts, and today, months after the case of Kenneth Bianchi has been closed, those experts still disagree. Next week on Frontline, the story of black political power in America.
Jackson! 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 Jackson!
the veterans of the civil rights movement, taking their fight to the national arena and looking for a leader.
Jesse is in the tradition of Martin King. If he was white, he would be the new Jack Kennedy, and they would lift him on their shoulders.
Will they choose the preacher or the politician?
I will work for a slate of candidates committed to Walter Mondale.
Anybody good enough to be endorsed for president by Richard Arrington ought to be the next president of the United States.
Mondale has raised more money in New Hampshire than I raised in the whole nation. He's been running 10 years. I've been running 4 months, and I'm closing in on him.
The stage is set for a struggle for the hearts and votes of these people and for the Democratic nomination for president.
We will win. And even if we do not win, America and Alabama politics will never, ever, never be the same again.
We call the film The Struggle in Birmingham. It is next week on Frontline. I'm Judy Woodruff.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for Frontline was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. For videocassette information about Frontline, write to PBS Video, Box 8092, Washington, D.C., 20024.